Good morning. I am Tammy Murphy, the co-founder of New Start New Jersey. When Phil and I first developed New Start New Jersey, we envisioned events like this. Events focused on discussing ideas to help grow our economy and improve the quality of life here in New Jersey. We thank all of you for being here and being involved. Phil and I have supported and admired the Center for American Progress since it started. We are grateful to CAP for bringing their expertise to bear on the challenges of the middle class here in New Jersey. David, your work has been invaluable. We are delighted to have Jean Fox, one of our fabulous board members, here today. We also are very fortunate to have Carl Van Horn on our board of advisors. Carl and the Heldrich Center for Workforce Development lead the nation in defining and addressing the issues that confront working families. We would like to thank Carl for his ongoing support for New Start New Jersey and for graciously hosting us today. Ladies and gentlemen, Carl Van Horn.
Thank you, Tammy, and welcome to the Heldrich Center for Workforce Development at Rutgers University. This is our world headquarters right here. We have no other branches, however. This is the only headquarters. We're meeting today in the new room that's named after Eleanor Roosevelt and Francis Perkins. And I think it's an appropriate place to be given the agenda today. As probably most of you know, I think you all know who Eleanor Roosevelt was, but Francis Perkins was the first woman to be a member of the president's cabinet. She was the Secretary of Labor. She was one of the great architects of the New Deal, an unsung hero for me, and I think a lot of students don't know enough about her. But that's the room we're in today. The Heldrich Center is committed to doing what we can using our research and our intellect to support quality programs that help people get ahead, be successful in the American workforce. And we're very happy to have New Start New Jersey here today. And I'm honored to be on the board with Phil and Tammy and my colleagues that are here as well. So without further ado, let me have the panel come up. And Mr. Murphy, right ahead. And we look forward to a good event. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you again, Carl, for hosting us today. And thank you for all that you do for New Start New Jersey. And I echo my also thanks for Jean, one of our great board of advisors is here today. When we established New Start New Jersey, we were clear we would not be content only to identify problems. We would help in our hopes to lead the way toward finding solutions. And in fact, we're here today to examine some solutions that can make some real and positive impact on the challenges faced by our state's middle class. No entity in the nation has done more to shine a light on the eroding security of the middle class and the solutions that can reverse that slide than the Center for American Progress, New Start's partner today. And I'm proud, as Tammy mentioned, this is an organization, CAP, that we've been involved with since inception. CAP, as it's known by most, has studied the, as I recall, Podesta didn't want to be referred to as CAP, but he lost that fight. CAP has studied the impact of rapidly rising costs, smacking into stagnant incomes, leaving a middle class frustrated, stressed, and stuck. CAP has identified this broader phenomenon as the middle class squeeze. And unfortunately, New Jersey recognizes the middle class squeeze all too well. In our state, except for the higher earners, incomes have leveled off since around the early 1990s. Costs for housing, healthcare, and education have continued on an unforgiving ascent, with families cutting back and reducing savings just to keep pace. Too many in our state fall behind, including falling out of the middle class. As the latest ALICE report tells us, and ALICE is an incredibly instructive report, asset limited, income constrained, but employed. So this is the cohort of folks in our society who are one or two paychecks or one event away from a complete meltdown. Their latest report tells us that 38% of the households in New Jersey struggle just to afford basic necessities. They are overwhelmingly people who work hard, yet find a middle-class life slipping away. A survey commissioned by New Start New Jersey points to a widening canyon between what a person in our state views as a middle-class existence. In other words, I know those are the elements that define a middle-class existence, and then what he or she sees in their own personal reality each day. That gap is wide and widening. Too few say that they do not have to worry about the cost of essentials. Too few say that they have some form of job security. And even fewer believe they can afford a secure retirement. And overwhelmingly, I have to add, this state is resigned to the notion that our kids won't have it as well off as we did. But people also know this does not have to be a permanent decline, nor are they willing to go quietly. After all, this is New Jersey. In the midst of their struggles, New Jersey's families maintain a definite sense of what it would take to strengthen the middle class and fortify our economy. Just last week, New Start New Jersey released the results of a survey in which respondents overwhelmingly affirmed that we should invest in education, commit to infrastructure modernization, offer greater opportunities for job training, and make higher education more affordable. The poll also revealed how those in our state almost universally maintain that New Jersey should be among the most successful states in our country. New Jersey citizens expect better. They want to see progress, and they know the measures they would like to have enacted. So today is about looking at a number of these possibilities for our middle class. CAP, David and team have devoted a great deal of attention to analyzing policies at federal and state levels intended to reverse the trend of middle class decline, most notably in their piece, States at Work, Progressive State Policies to Rebuild the Middle Class. An outstanding piece, I have to say. New Start New Jersey has collaborated with the Center for American Progress to draw from their research the initiatives with the potential to reverse the troubling trends in our middle class. The result is the document that we present today, a policy agenda for strengthening New Jersey's middle class, initial proposals towards security and prosperity. The paper lays out 7 specific proposals that aim to improve the middle class experience in New Jersey at every passage of life, from caring for children to earning a decent living to preparing for retirement. With a few of the policies, the debate already has launched in New Jersey. Leaders in our state continue to champion the provision of earned sick leave, a restoration of the earned income tax credit to a higher level, and an increase in the tipped minimum wage. I would like to acknowledge, and we would like to acknowledge, their advocacy and leadership. Hopefully, what we share today boosts their efforts on behalf of middle-class families. At the same time, a few of the initiatives you'll hear about are relatively new to the state, borrowing from models in places like California Massachusetts, even Mississippi, Illinois, and elsewhere. As I've emphasized repeatedly, New Start New Jersey has not cornered the market on good ideas, so we must look, and we do look, far and wide to find programs with records of success. And we take this approach in this report. By no means is today's agenda exhaustive. This marks only the beginning of an ongoing dialogue. As I said, the report focuses on 7 proposals, but we easily could have doubled or tripled that number. And the multifaceted nature of New Jersey's middle-class crisis demands a far-reaching response. It demands ultimately a comprehensive strategy dedicated to strengthening and expanding our state's middle class. I might add, and I think we picked the date first, so it's somewhat of a coincidence, but we were gratified to hear President Obama last evening express many elements of what we see as essential ingredients of that comprehensive strategy. And I'm proud to say that CAP, in particular nationally, and we here in New Jersey, have been out ahead on many of the items he addressed, including some that we won't discuss in our paper today, such as free community college, which we came out aggressively for a few months ago. New Start New Jersey will build on our initial work to offer additional policies for consideration in the coming weeks and months. Now, we also remain highly aware of the fiscal reality in New Jersey. These recommendations are not proposed in a vacuum. While a number of the initiatives are budget neutral, some do carry costs at a time when the state and taxpayers shoulder several burdens. Even so, it is our opinion we should not foreclose a discussion on how to strengthen the middle class due to financial constraints. At a minimum, we must have a conversation. At New Start New Jersey, the mission we share and the work we do has a singular and clear purpose: rebuilding and strengthening New Jersey's middle class. Today is but one step toward making that a reality. As part of our conversation today, we have 3 tremendous panelists and, I might add, friends: Millie Silva, Henry Coleman, and Gil Medina. I will introduce each during that segment of our program this morning, but I'd like to thank them all for joining us today and lending their insights. Folks, thank you. We also, not by coincidence, have the co-authors of the paper who will review their findings. From Washington, D.C., we have David Madland, who serves as the director of the Center for American Progress's American Worker Project and is the managing director of the CAP Economic Policy Team. David's educated at places like Georgetown and University of California, Berkeley. You'll see him and hear him in media all the time, and he's a rock star in this field. He's one of the nation's foremost experts on the economic and social issues of the middle class. And David, we're lucky to have you today. I'd also like to welcome the president, our colleague of New Start New Jersey, Tim Castano. Tim has had a rich career in policy matters both in and out of New Jersey, and I don't know what we, being Tammy and I and our board of advisors, would do without him. So without further ado, I give you David Madland and Tim Castano. Come on.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me here. Thank you, Phil. And thank you, Tim, for all the work that's gone into making this event possible. I really appreciate it. So my goal is, I think, to provide a little framework for why we did this report, to explain, I think, why it's so important, and help give some context. And so I'm going to do that. I'm going to focus on some broad figures about the state of the middle class in the United States and in New Jersey, talk about why the struggles matter so much, and some why I think we can reverse those trends that I'm going to talk about. You all probably are aware, last night the President in the State of the Union focused very much on the middle class and how to improve their conditions. And at CAP we like to take some credit for the President moving in this direction. We've been working on these issues for a long, long time. And the reason we've been working on these issues for quite some time is because the middle class has been really, really struggling. Most Americans have been really struggling for quite some time. This isn't just about the Great Recession. It is about much longer trends. Just to give one example of how I think the middle class is doing, or a few examples. Now there's no official definition of the middle class, and lots of people can think of it in lots of different ways, but I think one of the core ways to think about it is the income that someone in the middle is earning, the typical American, how much income they're earning. And for that person, for that household, they are earning today less than they were in 1989. That's a quarter a century where their income, it had a little ups and downs, but it has not gone up. Overall, it's gone down. And in some ways, that stat presents a kind of a rosy picture. In fact, it's really bleak, but it's sort of an optimistic stat, and that's because most households have had more and more women working. So before it was just the man working, now it's more and more common to have both working. And so even as women have entered the workforce, the income for a typical household has not gone anywhere. In fact, for male wages are less than they were in the early 70s. So that's a long period of not very good conditions for most people. At the same time this has happened, costs for basic middle class goods have dramatically increased much, much faster than inflation. CAP just a month ago put out a report where we looked at what we thought are sort of some core middle class goods, and that is the cost of housing, the cost of childcare, health care, retirement, and higher education. These are sort of pillars that some security and opportunity that make you middle class. And over the past 12 years, the cost of those goods have increased by $10,000, a time when incomes have gone nowhere. So that is putting a real strain on households' budgets. Not surprisingly, households have responded. They put more workers in the workforce, but not surprisingly, that's not been enough. And so they've gone deeper and deeper into debt. In fact, the typical household debt has tripled. That's increased by 3 times over the past 2 decades. So households have been really feeling it from all ends. No wage growth, rising costs, and they're saddled under a mountain of debt. New Jersey really is emblematic of these problems, and in fact, in some ways is doing worse. Yes, it's a relatively high-wage state, but things have not improved here in quite some time. I talked about, household income is lower now in New Jersey than it was. Typical household income is lower than it was in 1985. 85. It has some ups and downs, but that's a long period. That's longer than the nation as a whole. You also have the share of income. So another way of thinking about how the middle class is doing is to think of the whole size of the pie that the state earns, and the share that's going to the middle, 60%. Another way of thinking about it. And that share of that pie has shrunk. It is near its record low, just like similar in the nation, near record low. In fact, New Jersey is 40th in the nation in the share of income going to the middle class. Not where New Jersey wants to be. Now, why does this matter? Clearly, these are great strains on households, and that impacts their quality of life. But I think this is a much bigger story and much more important than just in the individual lives what it impacts. Well, that's clearly important. This has major impacts on our economy and our democracy. The sort of key ways that this harms our economy. First, you have this demand problem, that basically people need money in their pockets in order to buy things. If they don't have money in their pockets, businesses won't invest, and the economy grows very, very slowly. That's the basic situation we're in right now. That is the fundamental problem with our slow growth, is there's no consumer demand. But it's even worse than that. We are just emerging from the Great Recession, which was driven in significant part by these problems with demand, because people had no money in their no money from income, so they went deeper and deeper into debt, and that was a significant contributor to the instability in our economy. As people were so highly leveraged, they were very vulnerable when housing prices collapsed, and that contributed to the steep recession that we went into. A strong middle class also is critical for enabling people to develop their human capital, to get education, to get ahead. As our economy has polarized, as only the wealthy have gotten ahead, we have seen the educational prospects of the wealthy pull far away from the middle class and the poor. Another thing a strong middle class does is it helps bring people together, provide some sort of social connections, so that you're much more willing to trust people, and trust is a key contributor of being able to work together in business. You don't do business with people you don't trust. And the last and perhaps most important thing that a strong middle class does is it improves the quality of governance. When we have a stronger middle class, we have relatively equal power between the wealthy, the middle class, the poor, and these sort of society's goals are reflected in policy as opposed to just what the rich want. And as a result of the disproportionate power of the wealthy and the inadequate power of the middle class, we've underinvested in basic infrastructure, roads, bridges, in our education. So this is a very important problem, not just for people's lives, but really for the future of our country and our state. But this decline is not inevitable by any stretch. First, clearly all other countries and other states are affected by changes in globalization and technology that make a strong middle class something that's maybe harder to achieve than it once was. Yet if you look at the way other countries have dealt with these challenges, you can see that clearly there were different choices to make that would lead to different results. Now, the United States used to be the highest wage country, highest income for the typical household, the highest median wage. That is no longer the case, because other countries have had much higher wage growth and income growth than we have had. In fact, I think the majority of rich countries over the past 2 decades have had faster wage growth than we have. It's not, most countries have done better. It's not just that a few exceptional stars have done better. We really are not doing well. And then you can also compare, so that's just the country as a whole. You can also compare other states and see, have they dealt with these challenges better? And it's clear that they have as well. So, for example, New Jersey ranked 45th in the percentage growth in their median income. So I talked about incomes declining over the past 2 decades in New Jersey. 45 other states did better. And in fact, over half of them had pretty good wage growth. Not great, but pretty decent wage growth. So New Jersey's there at the bottom, close towards the bottom in wage growth, income growth. And so that leads us to this point, well, there are things we can do. We can learn from other states. We can learn from other countries. We can model successes. And really there's a lot of successes that we're highlighting in our report. And what I want to just sort of tease out, Tim's going to talk a little bit more in detail about the policies, is that we have pulled together a start. It's not everything, but it's a start to strengthening the middle class. And 2 of the key themes in the report are about making work pay. We've, decades where harder work, more productivity hasn't paid. We've got 2 key policies there, earned income tax credit and minimum wage, that start to get to that. And we also have a key set of policies that are enabling families to balance their responsibilities between home and work, which is an increasing challenge for more and more families as more and more dual couples are working. And that's about child and dependent care, tax credit, and paid leave. And so with that, I'm going to introduce Tim to come up and talk in more detail about the policies, but I want to leave you with that this is a fundamentally important challenge we're tackling, And there's lots to learn from other places that have done a better job, and we can strengthen and rebuild the middle class here in New Jersey.
So that was the good news. Yeah, we do have some challenges, but what we don't suffer from is a poverty of ideas. And thanks to places like CAP and the Heldrich Center, we certainly have a lot to work with, so thank you. As Phil mentioned, when we first reviewed this study, what we really wanted to do was make sure that we touched each part of the life cycle. So from how we tend to our loved ones to also how we prepare for secure retirement. So that's what we tried to cover here. Again, to echo a couple of Phil's points, one, this is not exhaustive. And two, we are very much aware of the fiscal realities in the state. I have a lot of numbers to run through, so I'm nervous. But beginning with the first number, within this context, we introduced 7 proposals, which are implementing a child-dependent care tax credit, introducing banking partnerships, raising the earned income tax credit, increasing the minimum wage for tipped employees, instituting earned sick leave, providing assistance to the long-term unemployed, and offering retirement accounts for private sector workers. That was 7. In terms of child-dependent care tax credit, unlike 28 other states, New Jersey does not offer one. A two-parent family with 2 children, a toddler and an infant, will pay about $21,000 annually in child care costs, which swells to about 24% of the median family income. It's not surprising then that the National Women's Law Center grades New Jersey an F in this category. We also have about 400,000 children under the age of 5 in 2-parent working families in New Jersey as well. So there's room to grow, and there's the opportunity to leverage this policy. What we recommend is following the best practices of other states in implementing a child-dependent care tax credit. 18 states peg theirs to a percentage of the federal credit, which is what we suggest in New Jersey. We also recommend that we make it refundable, which the federal credit is not. And the tiers that we suggest would be 100% of the federal tax credit for those who make up to $50,000, 50% of the tax credit for those who make up to $100,000, and then 20% of the tax credit for those above that number. So that is the proposal for the child independent care tax credit. Banking partnerships. The recession really has struck small businesses harder than they have anyone else. So the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco reports that between 2007 and 2011, small bank loans fell by $47 billion. Now the impact on that is actually in jobs, because we have also seen within that same span, 60% of the job losses have been through small businesses. In response to that, some states, notably Massachusetts, has introduced what they're calling the state banking partnership. In that construct, Massachusetts has shifted $100 million initially of state balances from national and international banks to community banks, on the condition that those banks then lend to small businesses with an eye toward job growth. Now, that proved so successful in Massachusetts that soon thereafter, announcing it, they increased the level from $100 million to above $200 million, and also the minimum loan from $5 million to $10 million. Now, in New Jersey, we do see that there is some improvement in our small business community, according to the latest SBA report. However, at the same time, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York has indicated that small businesses still have trouble finding loans, especially for those under $1 million. So we do believe that this would have an impact. The analysis from Massachusetts indicates that for every $10 million in deposits, that they create or retain 5 to 8 jobs for a total of about 4,500 jobs. Now, New Jersey also has evidence that our community banks do in fact lend in a greater proportion already to small businesses. So we would just be seeding what is an existing positive relationship. And that actually, again, would translate into additional jobs as small businesses create by an estimate of 2 to 3 every new jobs. Raising the earned income tax credit. New Jersey previously had the income tax credit of 25% of the federal level. It dropped in 2009 to 20%. There have been numerous efforts and repeated to increase it up to 25%, which we support. The earned income tax credit has shown to reduce poverty, pull families out of poverty. It also acts as an economic stimulus because those who receive it generally do tend to spend it. So it is a budget item, but is one that is returned throughout the economy as it radiates. Now, if we were in fact to have the restoration of the earned income tax credit to 25%, a two-parent family making $20,000 a year would expect a credit of $322 each year. In tandem with the earned income tax credit, we also recommend an increase in the minimum wage for tip workers. Now, New Jersey recently did, in fact, as we all know, enact a minimum wage increase more broadly. However, the tip minimum wage has not increased since 1991, and a lot's changed since 1991. Ours scrapes the federal floor of $2.13. 31 other states in the country actually have a minimum wage above $2.13. We are one of 19 that does not. A couple of things about that, which are the states that in fact are called, that have a minimum wage that is pegged to the standard minimum wage, have demonstrated that there's less wage disparity, so more pay equality among the gender, and as well as lower poverty rates overall. So 7 states are called equal treatment states, and equal treatment states perform much better than states with the minimum wage of $2.13. There has been legislation in New Jersey to increase it, most recently to $5.69, and we believe that is a start. This also has a tremendous influence for female workers who make up over 70% of tipped employees nationally. Earned sick leave. Someone just coughed, so that was perfect. Earned sick leave. 1 million people in New Jersey do not enjoy this benefit of earned sick leave. There have been several municipalities recently who have instituted it, which has closed that gap, but the gap is still pretty significant, and we do need to address it. Individuals without it are exposed to lower productivity at work, they're exposed to illness, they're exposed to contaminating others. Conversely, operations that provide earned sick leave experience higher productivity, less attrition, and higher overall morale. The several states, including Connecticut, California, and most recently Massachusetts, just recently have agreed to have either enacted or agreed to enact paid sick leave. There is legislation in New Jersey, and that is working its way through. However, that turns out, whatever debates continue on that front, the prospect and the proposal, really the merit should not be discounted in any way. The arguments against paid sick leave are nullified by existing data. So studies from Connecticut, as well as from Seattle, which as a municipality did in fact enact it, show that there was little to no effect or little to no deleterious impact on the businesses in those communities. Providing assistance to long-term unemployed. So while unemployment has displayed some positive signs as of late, that is not the case for the long-term unemployed. The data, in fact, offers a dispiriting narrative, especially in New Jersey, where over 47% of our unemployed are long-term unemployed, which are those who have not had a job in 27 weeks or more. Now, when someone, again, studies show that when an individual is out of work for a long period of time, that the odds stack against them increasingly. What states need to do is actually to disrupt this negative cycle with some more aggressive policies. A couple have done that already, with Utah, Colorado, Mississippi being a few. Now, New Jersey does lead the nation, was the first in the nation to outlaw the employment status in a job advertisement. There was legislation banning job discrimination against the unemployment more recently that did not pass. So what we would recommend is that the state take a more aggressive and affirmative role in providing services to the long-term unemployed, which would include counseling, availing, and I should also add that we're targeting in this instance older long-term unemployed citizens. And this would be introducing them to, as I said, counseling, job placement services that they otherwise would not necessarily be aware of. We also include in this partnerships with the business community. While, yes, discrimination is in place, anti-discrimination provisions are in place to try and get them to adopt their internal methods so that they would target more aggressively older long-term employed workers. Furthermore, we would also look at subsidies, that there are incentives, and incentives have been shown to work in certain instances for employers to hire long-term unemployed citizens. And then finally, retirement. So, New Jersey is not unlike the rest of the nation in that we do have a bit of a retirement crisis. Part of this owes to the lack of employer-sponsored retirement plans. According to the AARP, New Jersey, 53% of New Jersey's workers, in fact, private sector workers work for employers who do not provide retirement accounts, and that, in fact, contributes to some of the low rates of savings. New Jersey actually has declined. The National Institute of Retirement has rates states on a scale of 1 to 10. New Jersey currently ranks a 4, and we also have displayed a steep decline of 2 points in recent years, and that is the largest of any state. So clearly we do have a problem. A number of states have looked into this, examining their role in solving this problem. And the two that we look at specifically are California and Illinois. Illinois' proposal just recently passed. What California has in place is in fact a private retirement account for private sector workers, where 3% of the payroll automatically is then is invested in an account for each individual. The accounts are portable, so that they follow a person throughout his or her existence, and the accounts are also optional. So yes, you are automatically enrolled, but you can opt out at any point. This shows no cost to taxpayers. The state names a private manager to manage the fund. And what this does is it avails ordinary citizens of the advantages of having a pooled account, which includes lower fees, the benefits of relationships with the financial community. And also based on the federal thrift savings program, which is somewhat similar in its construct, it actually does show to increase savings for retirement. So that is the 7th proposal that we introduce. Again, none of these represent the totality of what New Jersey's middle class requires. It really is just a start. It's a start of the conversation, and it's a conversation that we do need to have and continue to have and build on. So, speaking of conversations, I'm going to turn it back over to Phil, who's going to introduce our panel.
Let's go. Thank you, Tim. Tim, thank you. Not enough numbers. I would like to, as I mentioned earlier, we are very fortunate. You're known by the company you keep, and today is no exception. That includes many of you in our august guests today. But it certainly begins with our panelists, and I think they are likely well known to each of you in this room, but let's make sure you know them. To my immediate left, Millie Silva, who serves as the Executive Vice President of 1199 SEIU, United Health Care Workers East, which represents more than 400,000 healthcare workers in New Jersey, New York, Massachusetts, Maryland, Florida, and Washington, D.C. Millie has distinguished herself not just in her life story and in her day job, but as a leader in this state in many ways, having been most recently a candidate for Lieutenant Governor. Millie, it's great to have you with us today. On my far left, Professor Henry Coleman, professor at the Edward J. Blaustein School of Planning and Public Policy right here at Rutgers University, although with a distinguished history of positions at many other august universities. I was at Tufts University yesterday, Henry, one of the places you've hanged your hat over the years. You're a longtime contributor to advancing public policy dialogue and action in our state in so many ways. Your interests and publications have primarily been in the area of state and local public finance, but you cover the waterfront. Henry, great to have you with us. Last but not least,
And appropriately to your right.
and appropriately to my right. Can you folks see over here? We should probably move this back a little. I want to make sure everyone has a very good shot at Gil. I was trying to hide. Is that better? You see? You've got to see Gil's right side, because that's his best side. Gil is the Executive Vice President of CBRE and the former Secretary of Commerce for the great state of New Jersey under Governor Whitman. He is a highly respected member of our business community and a thoughtful, engaged civic leader whose guidance has benefited literally the entire state from Camden, New Jersey. Gil Medina. We're going to have a little chat up here among ourselves, but we are going to want to open it up to any questions or comments from the House. So get those thoughts ready. We'll start up here. I think we've got microphones we're going to pass if we need to eventually. Fantastic. Henry, let me start with you. We'll go left to right here. You heard the seven commandments of this start. What's your reaction, either to the totality or to any one of these in particular?
Well,
Maybe I should ask, sorry, for each of you, what are we missing? Please.
Well, first of all, I think that what you have in place already is a good first start. I do think that there's no single thing, and the report emphasized this, there's no single thing that one can do to improve the plight for the middle class, but you have to start somewhere. It's almost like, how do you eat an elephant? Well, you do it one bite at a time, and you got a good first bite in place, I think. If I have a concern, and there are maybe a couple of things that I would tout from the report, you're talking about the middle class and the fact that the middle class income seems to be lagging, not growing rapidly. Well, I would also suggest that a problem with the middle class is that people aren't moving into it rapidly enough. That we have an ongoing problem with low-income individuals in this class. Everyone seems comfortable talking about the middle class, but everyone seems to be much more comfortable avoiding talking about the problems of the poor. I think a lot of the recommendations that you talk about do in fact speak at least in part to the poor, but I think that the poor shouldn't be an afterthought. The poor and the middle class are joined at the hip when you look at what's going on with income inequality in this country. It's the wealthy that are benefiting from all of the economic growth that has taken place, but I think that the middle class and the poor have both suffered in the sense that neither has gotten a reasonable share of the economic progress that has occurred over the course of pretty much the last 30 years. So I do hope that going forward we'll be a lot more attentive to talking about concerns for the poor as well as the middle class. Beyond that, I would say that for a number of the specific recommendations you have made, that there are particular things we might quibble about. For instance, we talk about giving the small banks more resources and more opportunities to help individuals borrow. Well, I think that that's a terrific idea. Where I get concerned is that sort of suggests that large banks don't have any responsibility. I think large banks are holders or repositories for a significant amount of state resources, local resources as well, and to turn and say, well, we're going to try to improve the ability on the part of small banks to do a better job. Well, it seems to me they're already doing a pretty good job. They could do a lot better, but we ought to make it possible, and we ought to make it likely that large banks get into the mix, contribute their fair share in terms of making loans available to small businesses, in terms of making resources available to middle class and poor families to pursue investment in higher education, in terms of making additional resources available to poor and middle class families so that they can pursue the American dream of owning a home. I do think that that was another omission, and again, maybe it'll come up in some of your subsequent work, but affordable housing is a significant problem here in the state of New Jersey. And I think that it may be incumbent upon government to take a more active, definitive role in trying to influence the market, if not directly contributing to the availability of affordable housing. So those are some of the immediate things that I think I would toss out to get the conversation going.
Amen to all. Before Millie and Gil jump in, a couple of quick reactions. I wouldn't disagree with any of that. And in fact, I referred to the Alice cohort, but even the Alice cohort doesn't do the poor justice, in the sense that that's sort of a mid-quintile, a mid-tier that's hanging on or trying to get in by their fingertips into the middle class. So your comment about what can we do about poverty and the poor in the state is extremely well taken. My second comment, and I say this as somebody who used to be on the inside of banks, one of the most dispiriting, discouraging trends in the banking community over the past, say, 2 to 3 decades is the shift in where they make their money. From overwhelmingly financing the community, whether that's businesses, whether it's individuals, whether it's sending a kid somehow through a higher education loan to college, to today, where most of that money is made as they say, in the intra-bank market from each other. Now, the good news is the exception has always been the community banks by their definition. And so we love the idea of they're getting more money, but with 1,000% agreement, that cannot unburden what should be the rightful responsibility of the larger banks. So amen to all that. Millie, it's great to have you.
Glad to be here. I really appreciate your comment about speaking on the poor, because one of the things that really strikes me is that in the state of New Jersey, where we have so many people who have the ability to earn much higher incomes, we're also seeing a poverty rate that we have not seen in close to 50 years. And so it really is a stark reminder that there are so many people who, despite working incredibly hard, they're living on the fringe. And so being clear that if the mission is we want to grow the middle class, we need to make sure that we put together safeguards to make sure that that middle class is strong and is able to grow, but also make sure that every person who is willing to work hard has the opportunity to grow and come into that middle class. And one of the things that I thought was missing is the U word, unions.
Yep.
In the state of New Jersey, over the last decade, we have seen the percentage of American workers who are also union members decline from 21.6% to 16.6%, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And we all know that when the middle class has been at its height in terms of strength, you've also seen a strong labor movement that has been the vehicle, or one of the vehicles, in which to be able to advocate for America's voices and to make sure that we are speaking on issues of housing, of good jobs, of making sure that people have not only a voice at work, but a voice in their communities.
I love that. I'm just, if I may comment on the second point, I've been in a lot of discussions lately where people say, okay, who are the stakeholders at the table? This gets a little bit back to David Madeline's last point about why a strong middle class has big collateral benefits, including governance. So in other words, having that voice at the table, if you've got strength and you're leaning forward, you can advocate on behalf of the things that you need every day: schools, roads, healthcare, whatever your kitchen table items are. If you make the observation, and I want to, this is a guy who knows the business community better than anybody I know in this state. If you make the simple observation of who the stakeholders are inside of the business world these days, and you look at the folks who are in the executive suite, you look at the shareholders, and you look at the workers, you quickly come to the conclusion, based on the data of how everyone's doing, that the stakeholder who has been weakened at that table is the worker. And you could furthermore draw the absolute conclusion, as you have just drawn, that it is correlated almost entirely with union representation. When you've got a big representation at that table on behalf of many, you even out that stakeholder dynamic. If you don't, you tend to weaken it. And that's sort of what we've evolved to. Well said. Gil, great to have you. And by the way, I assume that we can find common ground and build and strengthen the middle class as the core of the state.
Absolutely.
Between business and labor.
You know, Phil, and I want to really thank you and Tammy for founding You Start New Jersey. I think the organization is striking at the core of a malaise that threatens, I believe, our state and our country. And that's the belief that future generations of Americans will not be better off than current generations and past generations. At a different time, for a different generation, and in a different place, but under similar circumstances, the great poet Paul Valery said that the problem with our present times is that our future isn't what it used to be. Without a sense of a hopeful future, it's really hard for people to progress. I think it's fitting that we're having this discourse on the week that we celebrate the deeds, the accomplishments, the dream of Dr. Martin Luther King, because that gives us hope. The generation that he represented, I think, had much greater reason for despair than we do. And yet, because he was able to articulate a vision and a dream, that generation was able to finally begin to realize the true dream of the founders of this country. The agenda that's been put forth, I happen to agree with what Phil and Tim said, that it's a modest down payment on that dream. I must admit that one of the biggest challenges for this policy agenda is the fact that in our country and in our state, we tend to look at policy from a left-right orientation, from a progressive conservative orientation. That dogma tends to prejudice our response to policy initiatives. And frankly, you know, being very much a part of the business community of New Jersey and serving on the boards and executive committees of most of the major trade associations, you know, I looked at things like an increased minimum wage for tip workers and earned sick leave, and my initial instinct was to feel uncomfortable with that. But then when I started reading some of the details that you guys generated about what it is that tip workers are paid, it's clearly a challenge and an opportunity. We'll talk, I guess, later about some of the fiscal challenges and how we do this, but I have to say that this down payment on a future dream for America, those of us in the room can easily find ways to finance it, because it's a modest first step, but I think an important first step.
Well said. We mentioned in my comments, Tim and David mentioned it, you know, in particular, New Start New Jersey, we're shameless if there's a good idea. Either side of the aisle, wherever it might be, in New Jersey, outside of New Jersey, in America, or outside of America. And I'd love to ask each of you three, is there anything you've seen in your travels, and you all travel as well as and as much as any of us, have you seen things that are getting done elsewhere, environments for the middle class or the poor, or the Alice cohort, where there's real traction, there's public policy that's markedly different that we could learn from? Millie, I think of you in the span of your responsibility over the many states, or take New York right across the river from us. Is there anything happening that we're just sitting here saying, gosh, if we only had latched onto that, we'd be in a much better place?
Well, you know, it was only last year that New Jersey voters agreed to increase the minimum wage from $7.25 an hour to $8.25 an hour, and yet when we look around the country and see what's happening in Seattle that enacted a $15 per hour minimum wage, and you look at Massachusetts that is moving with an $11 per hour minimum wage, I have to wonder whether in New Jersey we should say, gosh, you know, should we have gone further? Should we have done something where we're really looking at how to increase the minimum wage along the lines of the Fight for 15 campaigns that we're seeing across the country? Because in so many ways, everyone here in New Jersey understands we are an incredibly expensive state in which to live. And I know that the Alice report would indicate that the average hourly rate that someone needs to earn in order to be able to take care of their basic needs is much higher than the $8.25 that was enacted last year, that I believe is now at about $8.38. And so that's a big what if.
Yep.
And so in the proposals that you have around, you know, do we look at raising the minimum wage for tipped workers? I wonder, should New Jersey consider leading the way around doing something where it's lifting minimum wage for all workers?
Yeah, that's your last comment strikes me. One of the things we determined in our survey is that folks think this should be one of the best states in the nation. So you always ask yourself, should we be one of 28 who does X, or one of 19 who does Y? Or should we be one of one that does Z? And so that's a very fair. Henry, in your many experiences and travels, anything out there that we're completely missing?
I don't know whether there are things that we are completely missing. There are some other important areas out there that, again, I think we need to think a little bit more about. An example, immigration. If I understand it correctly, New Jersey may be 6th or 8th among all states in terms of the number of immigrants that are domiciled here in the state. And they may, in some instances, bring unique sets of problems that need to be addressed. They're going to be a part of our future. I think at the national level, we've been really, really negligent about dealing directly with the issue, but a number of states have thought about trying to do things that would make things better in terms of assimilating immigrants, documented and undocumented to the extent that that may be appropriate, into their situation. I also think that we have to be mindful of the idea that we don't want to do something and then say, oh, well, that problem's all done, we can move on to the next problem. And I'll take the example that we've been talking about here with the Earned Income Tax Credit and increases in the minimum wage as the example. Certainly, I do believe that those two things are perfect together, is the expression we used to like to use around New Jersey. And you will, in fact, I think, do a lot more if you restore the earned income tax credit, if not increase it a little bit, and raise the minimum wage. However, there are other concerns. I had a student just recently who did a paper for me in a course, and she talked about the issue of wage theft. Now, it's something that doesn't come across the attention, the radar screen for many, many people, but there are a lot of people out there who are already in jobs, supposed to be earning minimum wages, and are not receiving those wages at the end of the day. There are a lot of people out there that are in the tipped occupations where even with the low wages, they aren't getting the tips that are supposed to be doing that. They are having to share those tips with the employer surreptitiously or otherwise. So I do think that we want to be vigilant, understand that any of these steps that we take are just the first step, and that there are always going to be other steps that we need to take if we're ultimately going to solve these problems and improve the situation for poor and middle class individuals in this state and in this country.
Amen. David, Madeline, and I were discussing earlier the fact that on President Obama's list of proposals last night was equal pay for equal work, which I said, that's one that we should have in our mix, clearly. And David and I had a conversation which mimicked your observation, Henry, a minute ago, and that is part of the challenge there is how murky the facts are. How do you know that you're not getting so little of that is in broad daylight, which can be seen. So much of it is, hey, I thought I was getting X, and I'm getting only 80% of X. A similar observation. I meant to say, Millie, after your comment about 5 for 15, there are a lot of folks, and Gil alluded to this, who will argue that when you do things like that, you exacerbate unemployment and you limit employment. And there's only one problem with that. It's not proven. The facts don't bear that out. And we have to remember always, and I know you know this well, is that money goes back into the economy. The main consumption engine of any economy, and certainly in this state, is the middle class. Or the near middle class, those that aspire to the middle class. And that's money that has a sort of an accelerant and a leveraging factor.
You're absolutely right. I mean, what happens is that when you raise the minimum wage, there is more disposable income for those workers, and they're reinvesting it right back into the economy and locally in many cases. And what you're also going to see is increase in sales tax revenue. So it is something where you are in the process lifting up some of those small businesses because they're going to see consumers who can walk in the door and purchase something that maybe they couldn't a few weeks before.
Amen.
And when you increase the earned income tax credit, since it's generally provided at tax time in a lump sum, you make it possible for individuals to discharge debt, to purchase a new car, to start build toward buying a home, all of those kinds of things.
Which gets it back into the economy faster. Gil, again, in all your travels, what are you seeing out there? What are we missing that we should be jumping on?
So Phil, I think that one of the biggest challenges of the 21st century, one of the greatest human rights challenges, is the status of women throughout the world and the unequal treatment, and basically the treatment of women as chattel in many parts of the world. Now, in this country, of course, we don't have that, but the reality is that there's still tremendous disparity in terms of the opportunity that women have and that men have. One of the programs that has been used in many parts of the country, the world, to basically help bring women out of poverty. And studies have demonstrated, and Dr. Van Horn knows there's position papers on almost everything, but some of the studies that I have read have indicated that if you can help take a woman out of poverty and into the middle class, it has a much greater impact than any other segment of the community. And what has been used in many countries, and I'd love to see that done in New Jersey in conjunction with this banking program, this micro-lending program, where women are actually given the training and the opportunity and the capital to start businesses. It does two things. It creates income. A woman who's working has flexibility in terms of addressing many of the issues that women tend to address in society. it also elevates the status of women in society and strengthens their position as leaders. And the reality, again, is many studies that demonstrate that if a woman in poverty receives money, it's spent on resolving the fundamental problems of the family, the children, the elderly, and the entire family. So I think that's something that we should explore. One of the things that we have to remember in New Jersey, because when we look at the problems that we have, all of us know that in many ways, New Jersey has defined success, as Winston Churchill defined it, as the ability to go from one failure to another with no loss of enthusiasm. But as we look at the failures and the problems, we tend to forget that we also have a lot of tools. Our New Jersey Department of Labor has experimented with many ways to train and retrain workers. We have to do more with them. The New Jersey Economic Development Authority could be a catalyst for this banking consortium. In addition to that, the banks and NJEDA together could experiment with programs like microlending. And finally, Phil, you and I discussed this when we spent some time together, that we have to take advantage of our strengths. We're a knowledge economy. We're one of the first post-industrial states in the country. And we have, our workers are one of our biggest resources, whether they're people working and deserving of getting more pay, or the scientists in the state. We have a very strong workforce, and one of the things that I think New Jersey needs to do is take a look at places like North Carolina, Research Triangle Park. The Research Triangle Park is a model that has been replicated the world over. People have looked at it, they've taken out the success factors, and they have proven that those factors can be replicated. It was done in New York, in the Albany region, and I think it's an important way for us to really strengthen a strength of New Jersey, which is our knowledge economy.
Yeah. So I wonder, ma'am, if you could get a microphone to this gentleman right here, Mr. Madlin. And before you, David, before I throw one your way, I want to just reiterate a point, that the last point Gil just said, which is really not on today's agenda, but he and I had a very spirited discussion, and Gil's thought about this at great depth. We believe that there's big upside, we being New Start New Jersey, and I'll speak on behalf of Gil. I think he and his colleagues think there's big upside for a knowledge advanced industry economy in this state. And we need to get from, it's a nice thought, it's a nice notion, we've got to get from here to there. But this is a state that is almost uniquely qualified to seize that ground.
And there's one more point that I want to make. This is the final point of something that we have to, I think New Start New Jersey has to look at. And that is, our urban policy in New Jersey. One of the things, of course, you didn't mention is that I was born in Puerto Rico, but I grew up in another foreign country. I came to New Jersey. And I say that lovingly because cities like Camden really, for too many decades, have been consigned almost to being part of the third world, not the first world. And what Millie pointed out, you have a state with one of the highest per capita incomes in the world, and yet we're a state that has people living in poverty. Almost inconceivable. It's a tale of two cities. So urban policy is really, really critical for the state. And there is a tremendous shift in population and employment and economic base from the suburban areas to urban areas. So we have an opportunity of a generation to really transform cities like Camden. That's it.
That notion is to be continued. We're going to turn for a few minutes here to any of your questions, so get them ready. We'll be right with you. David, I wanted to ask you one, either specifically Gil's micro-lending question or any of the other ideas that have come up that were not part of the 7. What would have been number 8 in your opinion? Any reaction specifically to that, but what would have been number 8 on our list?
I think the wage theft one was really key. This is, we talked about sort of hard to know how big the problem is. It's sort of, there's lack of data and there's a lot, but there have been a number of attempts to sort of figure out how big of a problem, and some at the higher end say up to 1/3 of all workers are having their wages stolen in some various form or other, whether they're being misclassified, there should be an employee and they're called a contractor so they don't get things like overtime. So it's not just a low wage problem. It is a huge low wage problem. And in fact, studies have shown that they did some surveys of low wage workers and found about 2/3 in the past week had wages stolen. But it also gets up to the upper end middle upper end. And so but importantly, it's about a level playing field for businesses. Businesses that play by the rules are put at a competitive disadvantage if they're having to deal with cheaters. And you also have taxpayers really losing out because you have companies when they're cheating their workers there, they also aren't paying the taxes that are supposed to be going in. So this is a big problem for all of society, and I think it also sets an idea that if you can't even enforce the rules you have on the books, what can you do? So it's I think a key additional thing.
Is anybody doing anything notable about this?
Yes, I think California and New York are taking the lead there, but also even federal government is. And so there's lots to learn, and among the things they are doing that are really, they figure out how to target their investigations, really go to where they think the problems are, not just sort of willy-nilly pick employers so you burden people instead of really where you should be focusing. They've also been using better use of the data to understand where problems are. And in cases, they've also had to increase their penalties so that really the worst violators, first time maybe not it was unknown, but once you continue to do it again and again, you really got to get serious with companies.
As my friends in Boston say, like deflating footballs. Tim, this should be on our list of research. That's a big one. And I want to also go back to the micro-lending at some point. Any couple of quick questions from the House? I see Tom Moran with his hand.
Tom Moran from the Ledger. What do you be interested in what this crowd thinks about the push to increase the millionaire's tax? And what your response is, especially yours, Mr. Medina, on the fear that could discourage investments in New Jersey? And if you have space, could you also solve the property tax problem, which is the middle class concern I hear most about?
And you've got 2 minutes.
Okay.
Do you want
I thought you were going to answer, Phil.
Particularly to Tom's question of whether or not you think it scares investors.
Tom, here's the challenge with the policy choices that we have. 40% of the state taxes are income taxes. 40% of the income taxes are paid by 1% of the taxpayers in the state of New Jersey. Reliance on such a volatile base for taxes poses challenge, because that income tax is, as we've seen throughout the past 5 years, is very volatile. In addition to that, unlike a nation where it's kind of hard to leave the United States, New Jersey has a number of unique characteristics that make it possible for people who work in the state to avoid paying the full state taxes. So, for example, we've got something called the reciprocity agreement with the state of Pennsylvania. And I'll make this short, Phil, because as you said, we could talk about this forever. But because of the reciprocity agreement, somebody who works in New Jersey but lives in Pennsylvania will pay the Pennsylvania taxes. And the differential is, I believe, about 5 points. Here it is. It's 8.97%, the top rate in New Jersey. If you had a millionaire's tax, you increase that. And Pennsylvania's levies a flat 3%. The other challenge with so-called millionaire's tax is kind of like what was said about the Holy Roman Empire. It's not holy, it's not Roman, and it's not an empire. It's not a millionaire's tax. When you really look at the proposals that have come forward, it's really a quarter of a millionaire's tax. Because if you're single and you earn $250,000, you'll be subject to it. So, yes, there's challenges. I'm not saying, my initial reaction to that, of course, Tom, as I said before, is a instinctive that it's a challenge. I don't have any facts to prove it. I do know that there's a lot of people that are making decisions. Active workers domiciling themselves in Pennsylvania, retired workers working really hard to establish domicile in those low tax or no tax states like Florida. So I think it's something that has to be considered very carefully because of the unwanted consequences that it could have.
I would just say, from one person's opinion, I'm a huge bull of the state. There's so much to be optimistic about. But we're in a math fix at the moment. We have to break out of a very complicated, long in the making math problem. And at the same time, planting the right seeds so that when we get through that math problem, we have a sturdy state built first for the middle class economy out. So in that context, Tom, I'd say you can't take anything off the table. I don't know how you can take anything off the table to solve this incredibly challenging math problem. But at the same time, boy, we better plant the seeds, the 50 or 100 seeds, so that when we come through that math problem, we have a really strong, booming state. Again, I'd like to think of us as being one of one, as opposed to a modest objective of being, yeah, we're one of 25 or we're one of 30. Other questions? Millie, you want to jump in? Please.
I mean, I think Tom's question really speaks to the elephant in the room, which is that our state needs more revenue, plain and simple. And I think that one of the big questions for the work of New Start New Jersey and the Center for American Progress is, how do you make sure that the kinds of initiatives and solutions are ones that can get funded if they need funding without undercutting the goals, which is to grow the middle class. And so that is where, in regards to the millionaires tax, you know, there was a proposal last year that said we would increase the income marginal tax rate from 9% to 10.75% for incomes above $1 million. That would generate $565 million. That amount would actually cover the child and the child care and dependent care proposal,
More than covered.
as well as increasing the earned income tax credit.
Yep.
So I think that it's going to be difficult for New Jersey to get out of this problem unless we deal with the fact that we need to generate more money. When people are at home and they are balancing their books and figuring out what to do, they're making choices. And they know that they need to cut spending, but they also need to figure out what they can do to earn a little more.
Well said. I think if you add up the costs, Tim, correct me if I'm wrong, or David, if you add up the earned income tax credit costs to the state as we envision it and the child dependent break, it's a total of about $135 million. So more than enough covers it.
Phil, I'd just like to say that I agree with your point that everything has to be on the table. But I think that what New Jersey needs to do is get into zero-based budgeting. Start from the beginning, because I think that, Millie, I see what you're saying, that ultimately we may have to come up with new revenue options, but we also have to take a look at how we spend money. And we have to really examine carefully, does the state really need to be doing activity X or activity Y simply because there's a constituency in support of that? Is that essential to the function of the state? So I think that, Phil, I agree with you that everything has to be on the table, but I think everything has to be on the table.
I think, Gil, you're right that the question of constituency matters. I think the constituency that the state needs to take care of is the middle class.
Well, and I will tell you, Millie, when I say constituencies, you know, I'm saying about special interest from every perspective. There's many strong business special interests that are trying to advance an agenda, as there are special interests from many groups. And I think that, you know, what I'm saying is that we have to really take a complete look at how we spend money and how we bring money in.
The big savior here, Henry, in my opinion, I want to hear from you, is unleashing the middle class. We unleash the middle class, kind of everything else falls in line. And that, in our judgment, I think collectively ought to be our focus. Henry.
I was just going to say a couple of quick things. The first is, I think as Millie indicated, if we did a millionaire's tax comparable to what we had done in the past, it generates somewhere in the area of $600 million. You can't solve all of New Jersey's problems with $600 million. So my sense is that at some point, other, perhaps more pervasive revenue enhancements are going to be necessary. Second, I would say that when you look on the expenditure side, and Gil is correct, we ought to be looking on the expenditure side. There shouldn't be any rocks unturned. But other than primary and secondary education, New Jersey is not an outlier with respect to other states in terms of the amount we spend. We spend a lot more on K-12 education than other states, but certainly not on higher education, certainly not on a lot of other areas. So I don't think that if we just go by that metric, that New Jersey, you're going to find an awful lot of areas in terms of direct outlays where we can save money. Where I do think we should look and pay a lot more attention is in tax expenditures, the tax subsidies, where we're spending through the tax codes. Some estimates suggest that we may be putting out $4 billion a year or somewhere in that area. Now, that's not to say that any tax expenditure or all tax expenditures are unworthy or don't serve their purpose, but I do think that they seldom are subjected to the same kind of scrutiny that we visit upon the outlays budget. And until we get to that point where we show the same kind of diligence in reviewing expenditures through the tax code that we do spending through the outlay part of the budget, we're going to be saddled with this problem.
Very well said. How about one more from the House, sir? Do we have a microphone here? Again, we're conscious, given it's a school day, we want to make sure we're on time here. We also, by the way, Tammy and I lived in Germany, so we're used to being on time. So.
Hi, thank you for letting me ask this question. We all talk a lot about income from labor, that the middle class and the poor, in terms of the total pie of revenue, that the middle class and the poor and their wages have been stagnant for the last 30 years. Now, what about income from capital? I mean, the middle class and the poor, I don't have exact numbers, but I could assume that many of them don't own capital assets like stocks and bonds. And you know, the stock market is at an all-time high right now. How can we get the middle class and the poor to get more involved, to get a larger piece of the income from capital in this state of New Jersey and in the country?
Great question. David, you should jump into that. Maybe, ma'am, could you hand the phone, the microphone? I think, David, it's the case in terms of when people are paying capital gains tax from the middle class, it's typically the biggest asset they own is their house.
Yes.
And it's infrequently stocks and bonds.
Yes, and you're getting at, you know, there's a couple of things going on here, but one of the ways to boost incomes for people would be have more people be owners of capital to get the gains of when the company does well, they do well, not just through their wages, but through their capital. And that is a concept that's either employee ownership or profit sharing or gain sharing that, in fact, Rutgers here, Joseph Blasi, is one of the leading experts in the world. So there's definitely more information there. Also, CAP has put out several proposals to how you expand this concept, how you encourage more companies to do it. We already provide significant incentives, largely through the tax code, to encourage companies to be employee-owned, for example. And I think you can broaden that concept. It is not the whole solution, but it is certainly part of the solution.
I don't know this empirically, David, but I'll bet you, and Millie, I bet would agree with this, that there's a very strong correlation between union representation and having a strong stakeholder voice in getting programs like that enacted on behalf of workers. It's a great point. Maybe one more if we got it. Otherwise, let me quickly do a buzzer round here as we break. I'll start right to left this time. Gil, you've been given the magic wand to run New Start New Jersey and solve the challenge of unleashing the middle class. You walk out of here on January 21st, 2015. It's 11:30 in the morning. What's your first move? What's the first big impact move you'd make if you were in our shoes?
My concern about New Jersey is that we're a $35 billion corporation without a business plan. To quote Helen Keller, when a reporter asked her, Ms. Keller, what could be worse than losing your eyesight? She said, losing your vision. And I believe that we're a state without a business plan, without a vision. And I think New Start New Jersey can put together all the stakeholders necessary to develop a business plan and vision for the state.
Boy, that's well said. Millie.
That vision and that business plan is one that needs all the stakeholders, which I think is not only the people who are experts in terms of policy or the different sectors, such as business, such as labor, but the actual people whose lives we're talking about. And so I would think about how do you bring them to the table so that they can react to some of the solutions that are being proposed.
Great point. Henry.
Leave nobody behind. Everybody, the middle class, the poor, as well as, I think, the better off in this state need to contribute and be part of the solution.
Fantastic. I just want to say on behalf of Tammy, myself, our board of advisors, Jean who's here today, we want to thank first and foremost Carl and the Heldrich Center team for hosting us. Really well done. And we are better for being in this particular room, given its heritage. Thanking David and Tim for an exceptional report. And you know, if you were trying to get a dream team to have a panel conversation about this stuff, could you ask for a better trio than Henry Coleman, Millie Silva, and Gil Medina? Thank you, folks. Thanks for coming, everybody.